flame to burn. One race that I can say I ran.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 21047.com podcast. My name is Keith Cartwright. I am the host of this show, and I'm really glad to have you along listening in today, wherever it is that you're listening and whenever it is that you might be listening in. I'm just appreciative to have you tuning in to this episode today. This episode today is sponsored by my dear friend, Kelly Anderson. Kelly is a dear friend, has been a part of this wild and crazy running journey for some time now, and so I'm really grateful to have her support me in this 21047.com endeavor, especially these podcast episodes. Kelly supports me through the Patreon platform. Patreon is a place where listeners, fans, friends, family, they can go and offer some monthly financial support to what I'm trying to do here, and that just gives me the additional resources and time to gather these stories, share them, put them together, and share with you all. And so all of that financial support really helps out quite a bit. So I thank you, Kelly, for doing that. For all the Patreon supporters, if you have any interest in checking out what the Patreon commitment means, you can go to my website, 21047.com, click on support me, and then that will give you a little more information about Patreon and how you can partner with me that way. So thank you again, Kelly. I am headed this weekend to Little Rock, Arkansas. So a couple of things there. I'll get to meet Sid Bush. I interviewed Sid on this show, a few weeks back. So pretty cool. Really, when I signed up for Little Rock, I had no idea that Sid was going to be there. This will be Sid's 205th and final marathon. So it just adds a little something extra to this Little Rock journey. Not that I need much extra, because I'm heading to Little Rock fresh off that failed Houston Marathon attempt. So this is not the Houston Marathon redemption. I will head directly to Houston to get that next year, next January. But it is sort of marathon distance redemption. It just isn't sitting well with me that I'd run that first marathon in November, back in Richmond, November 2016. And then the next attempt just resulted in a did not finish. So I need my next attempt to be one that results in finish. That's what we're going to tackle in Little Rock. Really fired up to see some of my running Megs Miles group friends, family down there. So there'll be several of us gathered, and I'll get to meet Anthony for the very first time. So that's going to be a very, very cool experience in Little Rock. So it's just nice to see this podcast journey, this friends journey, this running journey come together in some very cool ways. And it just always amazes me that where this running journey is headed, I have no idea, because I could never have predicted that it would be here today where it is. So it's always an exciting run. And so, talking about exciting runs, today I'm going to share with you a conversation I had with JP Caudill. JP recently completed the World Marathon Challenge, and that is 7 marathons, 7 consecutive days on 7 separate continents. And boy, listening to this conversation, you are going to hear one whirlwind running journey, and what a week. So I can't wait for you to hear JP. He's a great guy, obviously really driven, and so you're going to, I think, take a lot away from this conversation. My buddy Stephen Haggerty actually reached out to me via Facebook and said, hey, I got this friend doing this crazy running challenge. He'd probably be pretty good for your podcast. So thank you, Stephen. You were 100% right. This guy is the real deal. And the beautiful thing about having conversations with guys like JP is connecting with them, developing this friendship, and now I've got another running journey to follow. And as you'll hear in this podcast, the marathon challenge, the World Marathon Challenge, is not the end of his running journey. He's got some big things on the horizon. So I look forward to following them and maybe sharing a few more of those with you down the road. So I am now going to turn this over to my conversation with JP Welcome, Caudill. JP Caudill, to the 21047.com podcast. So welcome, JP.
Yeah, it's a pleasure being here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so a mutual friend of ours, Stephen Haggerty, he had reached out to me really coincidentally at the same time I was becoming kind of fascinated with this World Marathon Challenge, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. I'd been reading some stories about this, and then one day he sent me a message that he had this friend, JP Caudill, who was doing this World Marathon Challenge, thought I might be interested in talking to him on my podcast about this challenge. And so absolutely, I said, I'm really intrigued by this challenge. But before we talk about the World Marathon Challenge specifically, I'm curious, I ask a lot of folks on this show, how you got your start running.
Well, so it was kind of spawned in a little bit of, I guess, a unique and maybe interesting way. So back in 2008, this is actually back in 2007 now. My grandmother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. This was in May of 2007. And this, kind of really ties into my World Marathon Challenge too. And she passed away about 6 months later, unfortunately. And about 2 months after that, we took a trip to Germany. And just to back up a little bit, she is originally from Germany, and her sister lives there, along with would be my great cousins, I believe. And we thought it was very important to maintain a connection with them. So we took a trip there. And one thing that was striking was the amount of walking that we were doing around the cities, or rather the city of Berlin, was killing me aerobically. I just felt so incredibly out of shape. So after that trip, which lasted, I think, around 2 weeks, I came back and decided that I needed to do something about that. It just didn't sit well with me. So I hopped on a treadmill with the goal to get to 1 mile. And I think that probably took me a good couple of weeks. But I finally got there, and that sense of accomplishment kind of sparked, well, what's next? What can I do further? And obviously that has really spun itself. We won't go out of control, but certainly dreaming bigger and bigger things as we go along. So that's the short story.
Now, you said you went over to Germany and just felt yourself out of shape. Had you been at some point in your life pretty active, or had at some point been in shape that really triggered this, or was this running thing completely brand new to you once you kind of felt I needed to do something?
Well, so I had been doing some weightlifting, I guess, to try to keep in the shape. I started that when I graduated Virginia Tech in 2000. But I was also having some issues with that as far as kind of getting constantly injured. So I knew it probably wasn't something sustainable for me in the long term. But running was something that I never really loved at that time. It was just something that I felt like because I didn't love it, maybe that's what I needed, And lo and behold, I'm glad I made that decision.
And so back, you ran that, you got to that first mile on the treadmill. What was your first big target then after you kind of got into this thing, felt like running might be for me? What was your first big race or first big running accomplishment after you realized you could get that mile done?
Yeah, so I remember looking online, and I found this local 6K. It was a cross-country 6K race, and it's part of a series that they put on here called the Mud in Your Eye. And so I just decided, yeah, okay, why not 6K? And don't even ask me why I jumped from 1 mile to 6K. I couldn't even answer that at this point. But I went out to this 6K and I just remember feeling so overwhelmed and kind of, out of place, I guess. But it was so unique and inviting along the same line. So, anyways, did this race, actually went pretty well, enjoyed the heck out of it, enjoyed being out there with all the other runners. And, I think that's when I knew I needed to find out what's the next thing, right? And so the next thing was an 8K. It was the Shamrock 8K. And that spun into half marathon later that year, the Rock and Roll Marathon, half marathon here in Virginia Beach. And then finally I got into the marathons.
And so leading up to this World Marathon Challenge that I'll get to in a minute, how many marathons had you run, JP?
I think I was at 24 marathons when before I started the World Marathon Challenge. So a bulk of those came in kind of around my training as well.
And so the World Marathon Challenge, for folks who may be like me, I had never really heard of it until this year, and I'm fairly new in this running journey of mine. So some of these events that come on my radar have been around a long time. They just haven't been things I've paid much attention to. But the World Marathon Challenge is, in its simplest form, 7 marathons, 7 consecutive days, 7 different continents. And so when I hear about challenges like this, the first question that always pops into my head is, what popped into your head when you decided this is something I think I need to do?
Well, so, I didn't start out planning to do the World Marathon Challenge. I actually had just started out with the idea of the Antarctic Ice Marathon. I really, really had this kind of desire to run something extreme, and Antarctica was just intriguing. And back in Christmas 2015, my family kind of fueled that a little bit by giving me this penguin beanie baby and this polar activity workbook with some crayons, and then I threw in just a little bit of cash towards my Antarctic marathon fund. So I went online and did some Googling and got onto the Antarctic Ice Marathon page, and across the top you can see all the events that this global running adventure company puts on, and one of them is World Marathon Challenge. So I kind of have always liked something that seems a little bit bigger than what I quote unquote am capable of. So that intrigue kind of led me down that web page, and I was hooked when I read it. I mean, I knew that was something that I had to do, and I also had in my mind that I had some reasons that I wanted to do it. So that also kind of helped.
And so how far in advance of the actual race did you commit to doing this? I guess I'm asking, how long did you have to get ready to prepare for the World Marathon Challenge?
Well, so I spent a few months, kind of really thinking about this and thinking about the financial aspects of it and everything. And I think I finally committed in early 2016. So I had the bulk of 2016. I had the option to run it in 2017, but I decided against that. But I had, year and a half, a little over a year and a half.
So let's actually dive into this thing. So the first race, if I'm right, was actually sort of your dream to begin with. The first race, the first marathon was in Antarctica. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Yep. And Novo Antarctica, which is due south of Cape Town, South Africa.
And so what were the logistics of getting, I'm particularly intrigued about Antarctic. What are the logistics of even getting there?
Yeah. So, you end up going onto kind of a research station that's already established there, right? And we actually took 2 planes. There was one that was an Ilyushin, it's like a Russian, I believe it's a former Russian military plane that carries about 16 people. It carried most of the race crew and some of the equipment that we would need to put on the race. And then a bulk of us, and just to quantify that, there were 50 of us who were part of this challenge this year, took a Boeing 757 VIP. I think it was its first trip into Antarctica, actually. And so it was actually a really nice plane. But I mean, as far as comparing it to any commercial flight, I mean, it kind of feels just like any commercial plane would. It wasn't anything special. But then you land there. They have a special 2-mile ice strip set up there, and the landing is wild. Let me tell you. I mean, if you can imagine landing on ice, the plane's just kind of sliding along.
Right, I can't imagine it.
I have some video of that one. I haven't gone back to watch it, but I'm really curious to see.
And so running then, you slide in on ice. I've got to assume then you run 26.2 miles on snow and ice?
Yeah, so the course for this particular one was set up around the runway. So, one direction, 2 miles, turn around, other direction, 2 miles. And I would describe the surface as this really cool blue-looking ice with the patches of kind of churned up ice on top of it. It almost feels like running on beach sand a little bit when you're on those portions that have churned up ice. It's interesting.
Right. And so just 2 miles back and forth.
2 miles back and forth, yeah. So, a lot of these courses are set up in some kind of looped fashion or some kind of out and back fashion so that there's an easy way to support everyone who's coming around.
Right.
They can set up one aid station quickly and then, kind of break that down quickly.
Yeah. What were the temperatures like down there then when you were running it?
When we landed, I believe it was about the equivalent of 23 degrees. So, kind of a chillier day for here in Virginia.
Yeah, that's not too bad.
Not too bad, but when you get just a little bit of wind there, it's much colder than the wind that we would get here. I think just coming off the ice, it doesn't take very much to get frigid. But it was also interesting to me. It's their summertime down there, so the sun's up nearly 24 hours a day. One direction running on the runway was pretty chilly. You get a little bit of a headwind. But then when you turned around the other way, it was just unexpectedly blistering hot. And I just remember the first lap, how much I was pouring sweat out from how intense the sun was there. So I actually ended up having to strip a little bit of clothing off. I couldn't do it because I didn't want to sweat that much. So, it is really interesting, and it evolves quickly too. About 3/4 of the way through the race, the wind changed direction. The sun, again, didn't fully set, but it was headed down, and then it really got cold. And then some of the water and coke and stuff like that was set up in our aid table actually started freezing solid.
Wow, I can't even imagine it. And
it's wild.
And so there's 50 of you, so I guess when, the first runners finish, where are they hanging out then?
Yeah, so there in Antarctica, they have the containers. They're, kind of like jumbo-sized cargo containers in there. I think there was about 11 of them set up there. We had cargo containers that we were assigned to that we could go back into and change. And they also had some bunk beds if you wanted to lay down. And then there was a separate bathroom and then a separate kind of eating facility that we could go to and hang out. And those are all heated.
And then how long were you all there once the last person's done? How quick a turnaround then was it before you're on the plane? And I think the next stop then was Cape Town?
Yeah, so basically, we landed 2 hours later, we're running. You have 8 hours to finish the marathon. 2 hours later, we're back on the plane. So it's a 12-hour turnaround.
And then how long was the trip to Cape Town, and how big a turnaround before you're off and running that race?
Yeah, so it was about 5.5 hours back to Cape Town. And then I think we had about 2 hours, maybe 3 hours max before we had to be back out running in Cape Town again. And that was a rough turnaround for sure. There was really not a lot of great opportunity to sleep on that flight back from Antarctica. So you're kind of doing that one without any fuel, and not a lot of eating either, so not a lot of nutrition.
Well, then I hope so. Then the next stop was Australia, and so did any more rest factor into that turnaround?
Yeah. So after Cape Town, we had a pretty good flight over to Australia. That was about, I think, 13 hours. So that was really the first good chance to kind of, spread out, lay down, get some quality sleep. And the plane that we were on at that point was the charter plane that we would spend the rest of the trip on. So it was a really nice plane with lay flat seats. You could get these nice down comforters and really shut all the windows on the plane and get quality sleep. And also, try to get a little bit of food back in your body.
And so I've got to imagine then Australia, I mean, I'm just floored by this. Y'all are probably going into different seasons, different time zones. I can't imagine how different the environment must have been between Antarctica and now Australia.
Well, we had Cape Town in between there. So Antarctica, Cape Town was the second one. And Cape Town was, the feel was about 70 degrees warmer. That was probably my roughest race personally. The sun was just punishing there, and just didn't seem like you could get enough water. And I'm sure you're probably dehydrated from Antarctica as it was. So yeah, that certainly is a big factor. But from Cape Town on, generally it's about the same temperature or maybe a little bit cooler. Like for example, in Lisbon, it was a little bit cooler. So that was by far the worst.
And so I'm imagining, or I'm wondering, I mean, you've gone down to Antarctica and now you're feeling dehydrated there in Cape Town. The environment's a little more challenging. You're running this day 2 and you realize, holy cow, after I do this, I still have 5 more days. I mean, mentally, what's happening? I mean, are you starting to realize, or are you starting to think there in Cape Town, what on earth have I taken on?
I probably had a little bit of feeling of that at the end of Cape Town. I mean, that was just a punishing run. But I would just say in general throughout the trip, I really tried not to focus on the scope of the whole trip. I really just tried to break it down as much as I could. One race at a time, or let me just get to race number 4, then we're already heading downhill. I really just tried not to think about the trip as a whole.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think, just with me and like I say, with my own running journey, it is amazing how runners just kind of break that down. I already know I'm going to Little Rock next weekend to run a marathon, and for me, I already know I can't think about 26.2 miles. I can't think about how many miles are left. I just have to stay focused and disciplined with the one I'm on, or it really will. It can trip me up mentally if I think of what's left. So it's amazing how runners train their minds, even when the race gets as big and complex as you took on. You're still talking about just staying kind of in that step you're in, that race you're in. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely something I've learned in my running experience over the years. Is you really can't try and think about the whole thing together. Otherwise, you just you get mentally drained, and that's when you kind of get into a bad place. If your mind's not in it, then your body's not going to be in it.
Right. And so Australia, did you see anything neat down under? I mean, we're used to seeing the kangaroos and the koala bears. Did you all get to see anything cool? I mean, imagine you're not even in these places very long. You go, you run, and then it sounds like wheels up and off to the next place. Yeah,
that's exactly it. It's really probably not the best way to see the world, but it's definitely a cool way to see a lot of places that you might want to go back to. We were in Perth in Australia, so it's really not kind of that kangaroo, outback that you're envisioning. It's really kind of a lush green environment. A really, really nice place. But by the time we got there, we only had a couple hours before the sun was already starting to set. So that was our first night race. And then actually from there on, they were all pretty much night races. They just kind of got a little bit later and later. So, I would say that we had a pretty good exposure to obviously some of the area that we were in there, but also to some of the nightlife that goes on there. And that for me was kind of interesting. And that's a little bit different every place you go.
Now, how familiar, like in a place like Perth, and you're talking about the nightlife, how familiar were the folks there in Perth with what was going on when these runners, I imagine, it sounds like maybe you were running more through some city streets there, or at least through more of a populace. Were folks there familiar with what was happening?
So generally speaking, I think with the exception of Miami, I don't think anybody really knew what was going on. There might have been a little bit of tip-off from some of the locals, but generally speaking, you're kind of out there running, and people are kind of going about their life and kind of picking up what's going on. It's kind of neat. You see some of them really kind of get into the event, and that helps. In Australia, we were on actually like a kind of a multi-use path. So nothing too crazy there. We had an out and back, and it was neat. One of the directions they had this open air theater that was playing something from Star Wars going on, and just a little bit further down there was kind of this beer garden where the turnaround point was. So I mean, it was always kind of a little bit engaging, and you wonder coming back the next time what it's going to be like. Until unfortunately it got to be after midnight and everything shut down.
Right, and then you're on your own.
Then you're on your own, yeah.
Now, I am curious then, because, you are a marathoner, and part of the fun of running a marathon, and I've heard a lot in advance of Little Rock, how they have like a band playing at every mile. A lot of the marathons you run are very festive, and you feed on that sort of spectator involvement. It sounds like you didn't have a lot of that with this challenge. So I'm wondering, did you all feed off of each other, the 50 of you? Were you kind of your own sort of spectators and cheerleaders that gave you some of that adrenaline?
Yeah, absolutely. And that only gets, more and more critical throughout the week. And that's just one of the cool things about running, too, is how quickly everybody comes together. We all kind of share this common interest to start, but it's just always remarkable to me how quickly runners can relate to each other and can just instantly become the best of friends. And so I would say throughout the week that just got better and better, and it was really special for me. And I'll get to that in Lisbon, why that was kind of a really special thing.
Well, we went off next from Australia to Dubai. So tell us, what was Dubai like? I mean, again, this is another place you see all these images on television. A lot of us will never even dream of being there, but here you are running in Dubai. What was that like?
Dubai was kind of an interesting one. It had some logistical challenges trying to get the race off in time. So we actually didn't end up starting until I think it was just after 10:30 at night. And I think, at least in my mind, I was really hoping that was going to be one of the nights I could actually finish and get some food afterwards. And I think that was a little bit tough for me to start that late, because I kind of realized that wasn't going to happen after that. But then, we had this, again, kind of multi-use path that we were running on there. One portion of it was kind of like a boardwalk, well, actually more like a wooded section. And then the other side was almost like an indoor running track surface that they had put down outside. Really a little bit spongy, I would call it. And again, that was, you go out one direction, they hit a turnaround point and come back, and we did that, I think, 5 or 6 times, if I recall. And it was really interesting. Then the nightlife there was this crazy car show that was going on the whole time. Just all these exotic cars going back and forth and parading, and everyone standing around and talking. So that was kind of neat. And we were running right along kind of a beach area there.
Now, so after Dubai, you've got, looks like after Dubai, that was your fourth leg. So you've run almost 100 miles in 4 days. I'm just wondering how is your physically? How are you holding up at this point?
So Australia and Dubai were my quickest times of the trip. I was actually feeling pretty good. I would say Dubai maybe cooked it a little bit. Maybe went just a little bit too aggressive on that one. But generally speaking, I was holding up okay. I was pretty well prepared. I had done 3 marathons back to back in training. So granted, that's the 4th, but I mean, I had kind of an idea what it was going to be like, and I think I was well prepared for that.
Yeah, I was curious. I'm glad you brought that up. I was curious how you even begin to train for something like this, right? Most of us have our eye on one race, and the element really is just the distance of that race, whether it's a marathon or ultra marathon. So we kind of know what we're targeting, and most of it is just this physical, mental balance. But I mean, this World Marathon Challenge brings so many different variables into it that I don't even begin to know how you train for those. Everything from time zone changes to climate changes to all the travel. I just don't know how you do it.
Well, and the reality is that especially in hindsight, you just can't prepare for all of it. You try to do the best you can. I had those back-to-back marathons. I actually had some geographical separation between them so that I could get into a car and just sit afterwards. So I kind of compared that to getting into the plane and sitting. How am I going to handle nutrition between those? Is there any kind of special nutritional, things I have to take in consideration because of that? But then there's just you can't really prepare for the climate changes, especially coming from here. We had such a cold start to this year. So Antarctica, was no big deal really. But going into Cape Town was just mind-boggling. It was almost like going into our summertime right away, And then there's just so many other things that you can't possibly prepare for, like, trips going along, you're getting delayed because maybe it takes a little bit longer to get through airport security, or, it takes a little longer to get the buses loaded in the morning, or to get everybody on the buses, or get through immigration. There's just a million things that, even a half an hour here or, 45 minutes there that push the trip out. Now your timeline is getting more and more compressed as the week goes on, and you're getting less and less time to potentially get sleep or to eat, and you start having to make some decisions. Which one are you going to do? You probably can't do both. So it's not when we think about preparing for a marathon, I mean, we almost have, and again, in hindsight, the best circumstances. We know how to eat, we can sleep, we know what time the race is going to start, and none of that really happens here.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it really does. I mean, we talk about it all the time that running is a very mental sport, but it sounds like in this case that mental aspect of it really gets doubled, tripled. I mean, it really becomes an overwhelming factor.
Yeah, I would say so. But I also say, that's obviously, aside from the physical challenge of it, that's what makes it the World Marathon Challenge. You really just roll with that, and make the best of it.
And I'm curious too at this sort of stage in it, when you're looking around at the other runners, is everybody else holding up pretty well, or are there some folks that are really struggling at this point? How's the general group and team morale at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of mixed. I think, some people were a little bit more hurt than others. There was one person who unfortunately had to drop out in Dubai. But, everyone kind of got their blisters, or, maybe something swollen, or, maybe something, is, hurting and not exactly sure what it is because you can't do a proper diagnosis on a plane, So everyone's having their physical struggles with it, but everyone was still trying to encourage each other and just keep on going forward.
And for stuff like that, JP, did you have medical staff with you, I assume?
We had, there was a doctor on the plane who stayed with us the entire trip.
Okay. And so from Dubai, then we are off to Lisbon. So tell us about Lisbon.
Yeah, so I think Lisbon was one of the most special races for me. Lisbon it was a little bit chilly and a little bit of a rainy night, and where we were running was a little bit dark. So four of us who kind of represented, between the second and fifth place males at that point, decided that we were going to kind of stick together through this one, at least through the first lap, I think was our initial plan, and just tried to see what the course was like. But I think as we were going through that first lap, we all kind of just realized Dubai had really taken a little bit more out of us, and we were all just kind of feeling, just a little bit sore, a little bit tired, not really in the we want to push it or kind of, so to speak, duke it out mode. So we stuck together, and this was just one of the best moments of my running career. We just worked together. If somebody was falling back a little bit, we just throw the group up. If somebody needs to get some aid and it takes a little time, then you get aid and take some time. But it was just like being in that elite pack of say Boston Marathon, right?
Yeah. Everybody
working together for the same goal, and we finished together, and it was just amazing. It's such a remarkable camaraderie in that.
And the other guys, I imagine they all sort of felt that same thing in that moment.
Yeah, for sure. A little bit of reflection after that, I think, for all of us. But that kind of sense of group and camaraderie really continued right on to Miami. We all kind of stuck together, and I think that just made the trip something so much more special.
What is it about running, you think, JP? Because I interview a lot of people, and there is always some sort of story like you've just described. And even in one individual race, there's just always this sort of coming together story. What is it about running, you think, that inspires that more than I see in other areas? I'm sure it's not the only area, but I don't know. Running just seems to bring that out more than a lot of things.
Yeah, you're right. That's a fantastic question, Robert. I guess we all have a sense of what we're going through. I guess we don't use any equipment to get to a place. It's our own legs. We all kind of going through those same struggles to get to the same place. And I think everyone really relates to each other on that level. The only way to get better running is just hard work. And I really think we can all relate to each other in that way. It doesn't really matter what your speed is, how long it takes you to get there. None of that stuff is really relevant. We all train just as hard to get there. That all have that sense of accomplishment at the end of it. And there's just so many lessons you get out of being a runner. It's boggling. And especially all that translates, back into everyday life too. I mean, especially the patience, that you have to have over the years of putting in all these miles. I don't know. There's so many things, but that's what sticks out in my head.
Yeah, and you just said something there that sort of, maybe I've thought it before, but you said it in a way that sort of made me think of it different. I mean, this whole idea that and I think it got magnified in your situation because there was so many challenging elements to it, but just this idea of knowing what each other is going through. You're in this thing together. I mean, you all know how much sleep we're getting, how much food we aren't eating. This whole idea of knowing what we're all going through. And I don't know, I think maybe that's what gets missing in other areas of life, is that we don't always know what each other are going through, and probably don't take enough time to try to understand what each other are going through. Maybe if we did, then we'd become more like runners in other areas of life. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, that's actually a remarkable way of putting it, I think. And there's like you said, you can't fake it. You just have to put in the time, and I think everybody realizes that.
Yeah, and I think it's really cool that you all got to share in each other. Because the other thing I imagine, and we'll move on to these other two legs, but you were running for your grandmother. I mean, at this point, you're on this 10 or 11-year running journey to honor her. I imagine everybody in that group was running for something. I've read some of the stories of different people and what they were running for, but I bet you learned just some really personal things about the other people.
Not all of that has a chance to come out during a trip, just because there isn't the time to get to know everyone on a personal level. When we met in Cape Town, we had our initial briefing, then we all kind of go our ways. Some people stuck with each other, but that was about the extent, aside from the trip, which is just, not a lot of time because you're trying to sleep or eat or, do whatever you have to do to keep moving forward, to get to know people. So there really are some remarkable stories about, the causes people were supporting while they were part of the World Marathon Challenge. And I think you realize that while you're on the trip, but you just don't realize the extent of it until it's over.
Right. So the last stop, you're almost home. And we're in South America, where it looks like Cartagena. How do you pronounce that?
We were in Cartagena.
Cartagena. All right. Well, I learned something today. So tell us about that leg.
That was one of the craziest marathons I've ever run. So the way this starts out is it's a 14K loop that it starts from what they call their old walled city and kind of goes out of those old walls around the island a bit. But where we've been running pretty much these multi-use path areas through most of the trip, this one was really just kind of running down the road. And, we had some assistance from the local police on motorcycles, trying to keep us in the right direction. And just kind of generally watch out what was going on, but there's people driving in the street. There's people walking in the street. There's just dogs, taxis. It was just wild. So we get to this first 14K loop, and then we get inside the old walled city, and it's getting later. So that nightlife that I had talked about in some of the other cities was really heating up there. And when you're inside the old walled city, you're running down just this narrow one-lane road where there's, kind of restaurants and clubs and stuff on both sides. And there's just a million people walking in the road. There's horse and buggies, bicyclists, motorcycle cops. There's side streets where cars are trying to come through. And it was just insane. So this loop that doing inside the city was, I think it was about 1.5 to 2 miles. And so you knew what was coming, every time. But every time you go through, it's always going to be something just a little bit different, no matter how much they tried to control what was happening inside there. It's always really not controllable. So, I think there were some times during that run that I was a little bit frustrated about trying to get around people. But then I just had to kind of step back after it was all done and be like, that was just the insanity of that race was so cool. And I often describe it, as kind of like being an amazing race. That's the way it felt like to me.
Well, and I got to tell you, the way you just described it, I'm sitting here sort of smiling and laughing at the story of it all because I can picture it. I mean, that just sounds insane. And yeah, I imagine it is one of those things that much more fun to talk about afterwards as a story than actually being a character in the middle of it.
Yeah, exactly. At that point, your frustration level could easily be elevated, just because you're a little bit more tired and a little hungry and all this, But I mean, it was amazing. I would love to do something like that again.
Oh, it sounds great. Well, then, you all finished that one up and you're headed home to Miami. And so I've wondered about this, just getting ready to talk with you. I mean, whether you're running a half marathon or a marathon, you get to that final mile and you just know, man, I am almost done. So I can't imagine the feeling when you're on that plane headed to Miami knowing we are almost done.
Yeah, I think by the time we hit the airport in Cartagena, I think the celebration had started maybe a little bit prematurely, but at that point you're pretty sure you'll walk, run, crawl, whatever it takes to get through the last finish line. And I think we also knew that in Miami the environment was probably going to be a little bit more exuberant because there was media, and people who had come down to see others finish, and there was generally a little bit more knowledge what was going to be happening there that day.
And so what was the course and the race like there in Miami? Was it more of a traditional course or more still of this out and back, more spectator involvement?
Still a lot of still out and back, from the start of the race. This is along the Miami Beach. I forget what they call it. It's a boardwalk, but there's a different name for it. Anyways, a path that's along Miami Beach there. And there were a lot more spectators along the way. Again, people who had come down to support some of the other runners who were there, and a lot more kind of aid along the way, and a lot more people who knew what was going on, so they're cheering you as you're coming along. I mean, it was definitely a little bit more vibrant because everyone knew what was happening.
When you crossed the finish line there at Miami, how different was the emotion of crossing that finish line, knowing, what you had just completed versus other marathons you had run? How different was that feeling? A lot. Yeah, I mean, so every one of those finish lines at the marathons was certainly something special, right? I mean, anytime you complete a marathon, I don't care if you're doing multiples or one. I mean, it's always a special feeling and something to be, super proud of. But that one, I mean, just knowing that you had got through 7 of them, I was also really fortunate to have some friends down at the finish line there who had kind of surprised me at the finish. So that made it even more special that somebody had come down to see me finish. I was actually struggling that entire race to control my emotions, I got to be honest. I mean, there were some times in the middle of that run I darn near broke out crying because I was so just overwhelmed with what we had done and what was going on. And, like I had described that experience back in Lisbon, we had a group of runners here as well. And so we also had that camaraderie going on here, but we're just sharing the last leg of this incredible journey of our lives. And it's so hard to describe what the emotion is like, but it's all over the place. Yeah, I can't. I mean, I've been, I think almost every half marathon I've run at the end, there's just been some significantly heightened level of emotion, some much more than others, but so I can't imagine the emotion in that moment. JP, at the end of it all, so you complete this thing. What an incredible challenge. What do you think you learned about yourself, if anything, by completing that?
Well, I mean, I think this is true for really all of us, not just me, is that I think we're all a lot more physically capable of what we know, what we give ourselves credit for. I think a lot of the times it's just our brain that kind of gets in the way of that. And so, I'm always glad I pick a challenge and kind of, try to pick something that's outside my comfort zone, and I think we all need to do that more. We're all just so much more capable, and there's so much to be gained by learning that.
I am curious, since you bring it up and you seem like this guy, I'm amazed at this whole idea. I love people's journeys, and especially these running journeys. And so here you are, you're at the finish line, Miami, you've just completed 7 marathons, 7 days on 7 continents. And that all started with your grandmother's death, going to Germany, walking and realizing I'm getting pretty tired walking. So I'm out of breath. I need to go home and do something. I work up to running a mile on a treadmill, and now here you are.
Yeah.
The World Marathon Challenge. I don't know, but it seems like you're challenge driven. So I'm afraid to ask you what's next.
I don't have that answer, and one of my habits is if I plan some kind of run or race, I always try to have something behind it so that I'm always kind of motivated to keep moving forward. So, Coastal Challenge in Costa Rica is on my radar next. That's going to happen in February 2019. It doesn't quite match up, I don't think, to the level of insanity of the World Marathon Challenge, but it certainly is a significant challenge. It's a 6-day stage race there over about 155 miles in the jungle there.
That sounds pretty challenging.
No. Yeah, granted, it's challenging, but of course, we're not hopping on a plane. We can actually eat and sleep. So
right.
In a lot of ways, it's a little bit more ideal. But I'm certainly looking forward to that though. And I also just kind of decided to hop into a 100-miler a few days ago. So I will always find some way. But as far as kind of what's above and beyond the World Marathon Challenge, I'm not sure. I'm going to figure that one out though.
Yeah. So the 100-miler, will that be your longest single race distance?
Yep. It sure will be.
Yeah. So when is that?
That one is actually July the 28th.
July. Where is that? Becomes a big question in July.
It's just outside of Cleveland. So the race is called. It's called the Burning River. Yeah.
Okay.
The way I look at it, I'm so after all these marathons in these places that are all pretty warm. I feel like I'm at least somewhat used to the heat. We'll see how that translates over 100 miles. But my only goal there really is to finish. So I'm not looking for any specific times or anything like that.
So if somebody listening is suddenly interested in running the World Marathon Challenge, what all is involved in getting that opportunity? Once you decide you want to do this thing and you go to the website, how hard is it actually for somebody to be a part of that?
Not at all. So really you just go to www.worldmarathonchallenge.com and there's an application on there. Once you fill it out, and it just comes down to figuring out how to pay for it, which you can do all at once, or you can do it in 3 deposits as well. So it's really just a matter of registering.
Well, if anybody's out there, it sounds like it's doable to be a part of it. Me personally, I think I'm just going to ride this one with JP. I think I'm just going to live it through your story, and you exhausted me. I feel like I got to share in a bit of it. So that's enough.
No, Robert. There's one part to the story which I haven't told yet either.
Okay.
And I backed up kind of when I was mentioning, when I was trying to select which year I was going to do this.
Yeah.
This 2018 was a little bit more of a meaningful year to me. And so, it's 10 years as a runner. It was my 40th birthday here just a couple weeks ago. So it was a good reason to celebrate 40.
Happy birthday, buddy.
Thank you so much. But I also had a great opportunity to do fundraising in honor of my grandmother. That was such a big part of this trip. So I was able to raise $11,000 for the Pancreatic Cancer Action Network. So doing something like this, that has a special meaning, just really elevates, the meaning of something like this in your life.
Absolutely.
So, anybody out there considering doing this, think about, how you can do something, good with it as well.
What do you think your grandmother would have said about this crazy idea of yours?
I can just kind of imagine us sharing a beer together.
Yeah.
It's very, very German, very appropriate. And, I think she would be, she'd be incredibly proud, as she always was, I think, of all of us.
Yeah, I find it, again, I know there's other areas where it happens, but, runners always seem to be, dedicated to a cause or dedicated to a person. I'm looking forward in Little Rock this weekend. I'm going to meet this 72-year-old man, Sid Bush. He's running his 205th marathon down there, and he's just been marathon after marathon running, carrying a flag for our fallen servicemen and women, and you just talk to him and his heart just pours out for those folks. Like, you could just hear it in your voice talking about your grandmother. I think that's just another piece of the running community that is powerful, because you get to, and I'm really blessed in having these conversations. I get to hear all these stories about family members and causes. So I appreciate you. Yeah. I appreciate you taking us along on this, JP.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to it. It's fun.
Yeah, and so are you still raising money for the pancreatic cancer?
Yeah, I will definitely leave my donation page open, and certainly in future events, I'll be kind of pushing more donations to that. Yeah.
All right. Well, when I share the podcast here in a couple of days, I'll make sure that I point folks to that link in case they're moved by your story and want to help you out with that, because I think it's a good thing that you're doing.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and certainly any little bit helps.
Well, JP, have a good day. I'm grateful now that I'm going to get to follow you on Facebook. I'm an Ohio boy. I grew up in Ohio. And so when you talk to me about running 100 miles in July in Ohio, I'm going to tell you, in my mind, you may be taking on something bigger than 7 and 7 days. But you seem to me to be the kind of guy that's going to go after it and get it done. So I'm going to follow that, and I look forward to it.
Well, I appreciate that. Hey, have fun in Little Rock. Good luck this weekend.
Appreciate it, brother. Have a good night, and thanks again.
You too. Thank you, sir.
See ya. So how many of you right now are at the World Marathon Challenge website trying to figure out how you too can sign up for this crazy journey? I don't know. I listened to that one, and that one just has so many elements in it that are way beyond my control. Not that, a lot of them are always in my control when it comes to running, but when you start throwing in sleepless flights, eatless flights, marathons off 2 different continents, no sleep, we really start talking about a significant mental challenge there. So 1, I'm not sure that's for me. 2, wow, hats off JP Caudill. What a great story. And thank you, buddy, for taking the time to share it with us, inspire us. A lot of good stuff for us to think about there. So you all, I hope you'll have a great week. Whatever your running challenges are this weekend, go take them on with some fight. Like I said, I'll be in Little Rock, Arkansas, so I'll be sharing with you this weekend on Facebook and just relaying the Little Rock story to you the best I can. Going to meet, like I say, Sid Bush, so hopefully share some photos, maybe some live video of some Sid Bush time. But whatever you are up to this weekend, I wish you luck. If it's not running, maybe get out there and cheer somebody else on. And if running's just not your gig, then wow, I'm really glad you came to listen today. Maybe your first running experience will be tackling the World Marathon Challenge, or maybe it will be back all the way up like JP just hit that 1 mile run on the treadmill. You never know where that will lead you. Trust me, you never know where that will lead you. You all have a great day, a great week. Thanks again for tuning in. Go to 2tim47.com, TWOTIM47.com, where you can see some previous conversations, previous articles, and just a little bit more about what's happening. Y'all, until next time, have a great week.